The wait is finally over.
From coast to coast, gamers lined up to get their hands on this little package, Halo 3.
Thousands of gamers across the world queued to become the first to earn the latest offering in the shoot-'em-up Halo series.
We are celebrating the launch of Halo 3.
Well, it's been a month since video gamers stormed the stores to get their hands on Halo 3. Halo 3. Halo 3.
Halo 3 is here.
Its Halo series
Just want to play Halo 3.
24 hours, all for this.
All for this, and it's worth it.
We're not non-stop. We're gonna beat this game straight on.
The whole Halo series, it just come together so well. It's like
It's a heavily hyped Halo on sale.
Here's Halo 3, get it.
How long have you guys been standing out here for?
5 o'clock, 5 p.m.
skyrocketed past $125 million in the first 24 hours to boost sales of the Xbox 360. To give an idea of just how much Microsoft has riding on this, if the company's predictions are right, its first day sales could outdo not only the final Harry Potter book, but the debut of Spider-Man 3, which rang in at $150 million.
Halo, so let us tell you, Halo 3.
I am Maxie, that's right.
We did $170 million on our opening weekend, or opening day.
Unbelievable.
I'll be gaming all night long. By the time I have Halo in my hands, I'll be out here for 30 hours.
Project Tiger, later known as Destiny, was a project from some of the most talented game developers in the industry. Off the tailwind of Halo, Bungie would start working on a shared playground that hosted over 10 years of storytelling across 2 games and 12 expansions. Although no one knew back in 2007, Bungie would begin working on a project rooted in science fiction, high fantasy, western, with a hint of Tchaikovsky. Fueled by the narrative talent of the lead writer of the Halo series, Joseph Staten, Jason Jones pitched a living world of gods, magic, futuristic technology, aliens, and heroes, and a connected first-person shooter sandbox of shared experiences players could fall in love with. With the team already announcing their departure from Halo and Microsoft, Bungie took their destiny into their own hands and began working on Project Tiger. During this era of Bungie, they were known as best in class, champions of gaming, and people of the culture. Their success gained in the adorations of millions. The Vidocs of old showed a group of people who reflected the modern gamers of the time. LAN parties, late-night gaming sessions, and early internet culture were at the root of Bungie and allowed them to have a pulse on what gamers wanted from their experiences since they were players themselves. Bungie devs were known to be at odds with Microsoft, driving this mythical narrative of punk game devs fighting against the machine. But in reality, Microsoft provided structure, stability, and support. Bungie, being a business made and run by game devs and gamers, wouldn't be able to adapt to the new landscape in the gaming industry, having 8 years of guidance and support from one of the largest software companies in the world if they kept this mindset. So what did they do?
talking to a publisher a couple months ago, and they asked what I wanted, and I just want them to get out of our way and let us make a game. Trust that we're gonna do something great, give us the money to pay for it, and then get out of our way.
On April 16, 2010, a 27-page agreement would be signed between Bungie and Activision leadership, marking the start of a 10-year agreement. Although little was known to the public, Kotaku would break a story a full 1 year after Project Tiger began pre-development. In the story, a former ex-Bungie employee would disclose the name of the project, and that it would be a science fiction MMO FPS. The community was divided. Some fans were excited about Bungie making an MMO while still keeping their space shooter roots, while others were skeptical and most worried, since MMOs were already seeing a downtrend, and many other projects would be announced and ultimately die, like CCP's World of Darkness. While fans were debating the future of Bungie, Bungie wouldn't just be looking towards Destiny's 10-year project plan, but also set in motion a disaster we would all become familiar with today. Hidden away on page 12 of the Bungie Activision agreement would be terms for when Bungie could start working on their next game, Marathon. Okay, just like the title, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And before we get to the end, I want to give you some context so you can understand how we got here today. This is all happening in the early 2010s. We're at the height of the console war. We're still getting Halo games, and no one knew what a live service was. Bungie was at the pinnacle of gaming, and everyone was excited for what their next big game would be. And within all of this, Bungie and Activision leadership in secret laid the foundation for a 15-year-old gem to be brought back from the dead that would ultimately lead to their downfall. This story is about Marathon, but more importantly, this is for Destiny and Bungie fans. Over the past years, everyone's asked themselves how Bungie lost sight of what mattered, what excited them, their fans, and how losing sight of what their vision would cost them everything. I'm making this to provide some clarity on how a titan of the gaming industry became the husk it is today. I've been a Bungie fan all my life, and I was lucky enough to get into the Marathon Alpha, but while playing, I ran into a player that asked a really interesting question that inspired me to create this. Why didn't Bungie put this into Destiny? And I want you to keep this in mind as we continue. So, the agreement was signed. Bungie and Activision would begin work on their game. Bungie would get their millions. Activision would get the game. But inside of that, Activision would lay the groundwork to be able to control Bungie, change the way that they'd make games, and ultimately hold them accountable to critical risk, something we've become really familiar with in hindsight. The first of many critical risks during Destiny 1's development would start with the narrative themes and tones of the game in early pre-development. Dragon Tavern, the original fantasy aspect of Project Tiger, was created by Jamie Gressimer. His idea would have heavy RPG elements, player housing, and a persistent and shared world for new player experiences, while a lot of the original ideas would be stripped away by Jason Jones, who would take the core and turn it into the high fantasy, sci-fi looter shooter we have today. Unfortunately, Jamie, unable to recognize the game he spent years on, would depart in 2010, causing a cascading failure of issues without his leadership and foresight. Next, in an effort to unite the team under a consistent story vision, Joseph Staten's Supercut story would be scrapped due to poor presentation, in part due to the problem that he aimed to fix. Poor presentation, incomplete dialogues, and unfinished animations would cause the entire vision to fall apart. And the problem was that we already got a glimpse of the story at E3 and Gamescom of that year. Behind the scenes, Jason Jones would work with Christopher Barrett, Luke Smith, Marty O'Donnell, and a couple of other devs to create a new sterile version of the story under the banner of Iron Bar. Sadly, this would cause Joseph to leave in 2013. We would only get glimpses of his story in the Grimoire cards and future leak footage. To add insult to injury, the Tiger engine wouldn't even be fit to build the world that Bungie was trying to create. The rendering engine would have to be completely reworked to improve workflow. Even after consolidating the story team behind a unified front, Marty O'Donnell would wrongfully be fired from Bungie in 2014, months before release, leading to a lawsuit both parties would ultimately settle out of. The worst issue was internally, questions had been asked by former staff that hadn't been addressed. Questions we've become so familiar with today. How do you make content stay fresh no matter how many times people replay it? What does a player do after they finish the game? What would progression look like? Over time, with some of these questions going unanswered, Destiny would form around the gaps, while the team would reboot the game in late 2013, crunching staff while barreling towards their new 2014 release date.
Game ever made is out today. Development and marketing of Destiny cost $500 million. It's a futuristic shooter from the company that created the popular Halo games and from the publisher of the Call of Duty franchise. So both companies are hoping this will be the start of another long series. So, is Destiny worth the $500 million price tag? $500 million price tag. $500 million price tag.
$500 million.
$500 million.
It could be the most expensive video game ever created with Activision.
The 500 mil will be
$500 million.
$500 million.
They intend for Destiny to become their third billion-dollar franchise.
As Activision and Bungie jointly hope the title will have a 10-year lifespan.
Looks like they have some huge plans for it.
A game changer.
Activision is hoping to at least double their investment. Huge sum to sink into an untested IP.
Perhaps a Halo killer.
The
really pushing the graphical fidelity to the max.
From the developer Bungie, their first all-new game in coming up to 13 years, which is quite some time.
Game that is the first entry into what will certainly be a larger franchise.
Yippers! Multiple platforms.
They're hoping for a very immersive game experience, which I think the early reviews are in, and they seem to be delivering on that front. So
We're gonna be getting some Bungie loving, PlayStation fans.
Spiritual successor of the very, very successful Halo franchise. Destiny will be available on PS4, Xbox One, PS3, and Xbox 360 this September.
Who here's for Destiny? Oh, come on!
What the hell happened? It's not the greatest thing in the world. It's also, I don't hate it.
It says that guy's really hard in Destiny. They actually mean that guy has a lot of health.
Was this intentional?
So it feels like you're constantly just shooting shit for no reason.
Is it worthy of the 6 out of 10s it's getting from GameSpot?
Farm for gear by doing missions you've probably already done.
Stop me from wishing that these features were.
How can Destiny, one of the most expensive games of all time, with a whopping $500 million...
Specific reasons why Destiny in particular is divisive, I feel like the fallout from the game's reception is emblematic of a much wider trend in games.
Destiny 1 would release to massive success, although mainstream journalists would point out its lack of fullness. Players were excited to jump into Bungie's new world, but things were different. Players immediately noticed a lack of change in content that they had played earlier at events during the beta, and they were justifiably upset. Activision invested $500 million into Destiny, and this is all we got. A couple strikes, a couple patrols, a shallow story, and they already revealed the next 2 expansions that were planned well before release. Although the game we received wasn't fully complete, promises for future content provided players with something to look forward to, and by Christmas of 2014, Bungie would already have reached $1.2 billion in sales for Destiny alone. As Destiny continued to grow in both players and world, Bungie had to keep going. Activision and Bungie had planned for 10 years of content between 4 games and 4 expansions that would come out in alternating years. Bungie leadership set the team up for a marathon that they were locked into, and as the entire company dedicated new staff and teams to continuing building D1, internally work began on their promised sequel. Funny enough, Activision and Bungie would call these expansions in their agreements comets, and when a comet passes too close to the sun, it starts to fizzle out. Destiny 2 and Bungie would go through massive changes in 2016. First, Pete Parsons would be named CEO in January. Then, Luke Smith in spring of that year would take over as game director of Destiny 2. This would cause Ryan Ellis to shift to creative director. He would later leave Bungie in June of that year and would go on to work as game director on Concord. Ryan Ellis was one of the original team members on Jamie Gressimer's Dragon Tavern project that would ultimately turn into Destiny. As one of the initial 4 developers, he was a key senior staff in overseeing the development of Destiny 2 from 2014 to 2016. Speculation is that Ryan Ellis was the original game director before being replaced by Luke Smith for Destiny 2. Destiny 2's development would be the start of many future plagiarism and art theft incidents, with D2's launch campaign, The Red War, being a stolen narrative by author Kelsey Martinet. Luke Smith and Christopher Barrett would steamroll the company at the behest of the higher-ups if it meant reaching their 2017 release date. Bungie magic would be made from the bones of chewed-up developers working 70-hour weeks, all while supporting Destiny 1. From the outside, Bungie was still oppressed by Activision, and fans would wish for the day that they could be finally free from their oppressors. But in reality, the team had 2.5 years, 3 studios, and nearly 800 staff working on the project. Bungie had all the tools for success, and with Pete Parsons at the head of the studio, they should have had a smooth ride into the sequels. Instead, it turned into a hellscape hurtling towards the point of no return. And on September 6, 2017, Destiny 2 released. The game was a hit. By December of that year, the game already outsold D1 within a couple of months. More than 25 million players would jump in to save the tower from the Red Legion and regain their light. Destiny 2 was an echo of D1, shallow storytelling, overall less content, and even more avaricious microtransactions. Destiny 2 would manage to break through solely on brand recognition and the goodwill of players from Destiny 1 alone. They'd managed to keep players engaged, all while maintaining their momentum. Destiny 2 would be the start of many things for Bungie. They were free to start working on other games, their senior developers were becoming deservedly wealthy, and the studio grew to new acclaim. D1 laid the foundation for what Destiny 2 could become, but it also marked the beginning of a new direction Bungie would take. Upon the success of Destiny 2, Bungie reached their new milestone, freeing up senior staff to start working on their new passion projects. Christopher Barrett would finally be able to start working on his next project based on the game that inspired him to join Bungie. So with the Tiger engine in hand, a couple developers, the freedom from Activision, and a couple $100 million from China, they started making Marathon. Marathon started as a test build in 2018 with tools from the Tiger engine. The team used Destiny assets to build a game familiar to the ones members of the team started playing, Tarkov. Although the public didn't know at the time, Marathon was coming back. Rumors started from an online user called Anon the Nine about Destiny 3 being a PvPvE game, giving up on traditional PvP for a more immersive and dynamic playground with more build crafting, player looting, and other RPG elements. Fans started to discuss online the future of Destiny, and off the high of Forsaken, the entire community believed anything was possible. Internally, it was the same Bungie, if not worse. The success of Destiny 2 started to rot at the core of the studio. Senior developers, although becoming wealthy, got blinded by their success as misuse of funds and harassment allegations would pile up. With the team split across a later recorded 5 projects, Bungie's death spiral would start. During the pre-development design phase of Marathon in 2018, developers found inspiration for their game's aesthetics from a Twitter user called Anti-Real, but would ultimately steal their work in numerous texture sheets. Anti-Real's art would become the very foundation of the game. In a sense, they would be their lead designer. The 2020 pandemic would be a massive roadblock for the entire gaming industry. Bungie was no exception. Bungie would face issues with managing development of multiple games without having larger supervision, and would fail to meet several release deadlines for Destiny 2 expansions. Over time, Destiny 2 would also begin to morph as content vaulting would ultimately lead to hours of cherished paid content vanishing with no way of recovery. This would lead to Sony eventually purchasing Bungie for $3.7 billion, a number that would only make sense once the sales data would leak from the Microsoft ABK acquisition investigation, and Marathon would finally be announced. In 2023, Bungie would lose 100 developers in a restructuring initiative. Shortly after, Christopher Barrett would be fired as game director after several incidents regarding sexual harassment, and would be replaced by Joe Ziegler, former Valorant director. Bungie would then have another set of layoffs, losing nearly 17% of their workforce right after the release of Destiny 2's finale to the Light and Darkness saga. And on April 12, 2025, Marathon was fully revealed to the world. With the full reveal of Marathon, we saw the full transformation of Bungie after over a decade of success with Destiny. And Bungie was, in all seriousness, a polished pile of shit worth $3.7 billion. Sterile studio sets, inorganic audience reactions, little to no gameplay, little to no story, bleak environments, soulless heroes, shallow gameplay, and no proximity chat. Marathon was sold to the public as an extraction shooter for both fans of the genre and Bungie gameplay. The game had more streamlined systems that removed the complex nature of other games in the genre. Heroes were added in an effort to give the game a stronger identity, but in the end it ended up being as uninspired as Concord. The lack of basic features that were considered staples in the extraction shooter were missing, and we were told we would be getting a finished product this September. Players would get the chance to play the alpha on April 23rd, and within days, we would see the worst unfold.
Let's fucking go!
This game should run better for
you go. Oh my god, but it's missing that one thing. The loop is not yet closed.
I think they're trying to Valorant-ize Tarkov.
One's behind you coming back, Jack.
Mouse magnetism and aim assist.
It's hero-based.
Blackbird is very reconnaissance.
Lying through their teeth.
Then Arc Raiders came out, and it didn't stop.
Positive response to Arc Raiders.
Utterly overshadow Marathon in every way in terms of...
Big streamers have fallen off of it already.
And I wanted to talk about the difference between the two games.
They had the Marathon name.
People have been saying Marathon's cooked, Bungie's cooked.
Not going as originally planned and maybe altogether cancelled.
Bitch, it's 5 months away. It's like you don't have time to be early.
Then Anti-Real tweeted, and the floor fell from beneath them.
It's ridiculous. Like, plagiarizing art is insane.
That Bungie had stolen her artwork.
That the artist hid
You'd
lost.
think that would be the initial stance.
This is not the first time, or second time, or third time, or fourth time. It might even be the fifth time something like this has come up.
They stole her entire creative identity, right?
And its environments are covered with assets lifted from poster designs I made in 2017.
In fact, probably the one good-looking thing about the game.
Apology to Anti-Real, whose work was used in this case.
And then on May 16, 2025, Bungie went live.
The worst developer stream I've ever seen in my life.
Is that the executives at Bungie are intentionally,
unequivocally needed delay, and that was already kind of apparent.
Driving the plane into the ground.
There are now no plans to do paid marketing for Marathon at all.
So that they can jump out the back.
How exactly does stuff like this keep happening in the first place?
I say this stream did them absolutely no favors whatsoever.
What the fuck is happening here?
If Bungie actually genuinely release a new game that's just bad.
Because at this point, I think it's pretty clear. The game is not where they would like it to be 5 months out from launch.
As I mentioned earlier, this video started because I met a player in Marathon that asked why wasn't this in Destiny, and I think now we know. Many developers over the years had the same concerns players had expressed. The same questions that Jamie Gressimer would send an email blast in 2010 would be the same questions that would haunt them as fans would pick apart the project Bungie leadership banked nearly the future of 300 developers on. Concerns for PvE and player engagement would fall on deaf ears as Bungie leadership would maintain the facade of a stable AAA studio. The anti-real art theft really seemed to set the gaming community ablaze, with cries for cancellation and delays at most. Bungie response didn't help with clarifying any of the audience's concerns. They seemed to be talking about the idea of creating a game, while we were expecting a finished product this September. For a studio that consulted on all of PlayStation's recently approved games, Bungie had reached a new low for the gaming industry, and as a part of Sony, we already knew their sentiment. In early 2024, during a Sony financial report, Sony CEO Hiroki Totoki said, "I visited Bungie Studios and had meetings with their management, and I saw many employees working at the studio that were highly motivated, showing great creativity as well as impressive knowledge in the live service space. However, I felt that there was room for improvement for the business perspective with regards to areas such as business use of expenses and assuming accountability for development timelines. I hope to continue this dialogue and come up with some good solutions." So before we end, I wanted to show you guys this tweet from Randy Pitchford, the head of the Borderlands studio, where a fan asked about the game being priced at $80, and I think this tweet sums up player sentiment across the board. Destiny fans have invested years and hundreds of dollars to experience the world Bungie created, and over time, they've seen how player investment has been treated. The Destiny 3 rumors from 2019 sparked hope in fans as we continued to get amazing expansions and stories. With Destiny being a pioneer in the live service space, they created a platform that could house numerous experiences: PvP, PvE, sparrow racing, raids, live community events, and so many other features. The amount of game modes in Destiny are so much that a player can solely focus on one aspect of the game and become a part of a dedicated community. and Activision used Destiny as a proof of concept for what would later become the Call of Duty launcher. They've been extremely successful with launching numerous game modes, maintaining player engagement, all while their annual releases. They even tried to make an extraction shooter, although to little success, but it proved to Destiny fans that Bungie could evolve the game if they kept this as the studio's top priority. This model works for a developer that's focusing on a single franchise, but Bungie wanted more. They had over 5 different games in development internally and suffered a crisis of their own creation. When I started working on this video in early May, I had an idea of the direction things would go right after the anti-real incident. This Bungie Marathon situation is a microcosm of a larger issues fans have been addressing for years, dating back as far as live services as a whole. Players are tired of the AAA facade, where studio leadership built their legacies off of people who are barely involved or no longer a part of the company. The misuse of business expenses, lack of accountability, sexual harassment, wage inequality, inappropriate jokes, good old boys club energy, and the lack of care and insight from that initial energy that we talked about from the start of this video that created their legacy in the first place. Players want to drain the swamp no matter the circumstances. They want to see bad leadership dismantled no matter the consequences, setting an example to help course correct the industry as a whole. And we're seeing change happen. Studios that are listening to players, holding the hearts of players in their minds while they're developing these games are being rewarded. Fans are evangelizing for games that are respecting their time, money, values, and imagination. And I honestly think only now studios are starting to realize this as a whole. Marathon has allowed for the gaming industry to be able to understand that players and fans don't want to be overly marketed to. They want to be able to get games that are high quality, that aren't pandering to them, that aren't trying to put them into a box and allow them to be able to have a great and visceral experience. On June 17, 2025, Bungie officially announced Marathon would be delayed indefinitely, with a potential release date of Q4 2025. In the letter addressed to fans, Bungie listed off a bunch of changes to Marathon that they would be committing to, one of them being proximity chat. We'd find out later from streamers and others that visited Bungie that proximity chat had been one of the most requested features weeks prior to the official release, and internally they were hesitant due to the necessity for moderation. Sony has committed publicly to pursuing live service games and is actively relying on Bungie to deliver them a franchise that they can sustain growth from. Marathon seems to be the horse that everyone at the company is betting on, and fans have seen this before. We've seen AAA studios reveal games, delay them, only to release them more broken than we initially saw. This is the song and dance we've been trained to become used to. Bungie is a big studio, but we've seen studios just as big fail just the same, and fans are banking on a public failure to change the industry. As we see the finish line for this marathon Bungie started so many years ago finally come into view, they're on their last legs. Fan support is dwindling, Sony has them on a tight leash, and team morale is in constant freefall. And now we have our deadline, winter 2026. So we'll see if Bungie can finish this marathon. Thank you for watching.